So we'll be thinking about permaculture, what permaculture might teach us about sustainable business. I'm really thrilled to be joined by our speaker, the founder and CEO of Word Forest, which is an environmental and educational charity taking a holistic approach to climate action in Africa through supporting the empowerment of women, school building, facilitating education, and reforestation. So please welcome the marvelous human who is Tracey West.
What a lovely build-up. That was quite spectacular.
You're a marvelous human.
The wonderful human who is very coldy at the moment. I'm just coming out of a horrendous cold, so my throat has been a little challenged of late. So I have cheated slightly by having a small video in the middle of this, just so I can take a breather, because I'm really just getting my voice back. Thank you, Richard, very much for inviting me to have a discussion about this. I remember chatting to you about what we could talk about, you know, what presentation I could do. And this one just sort of, I think we were in the height of doing stuff in the garden in the summer. So permaculture just seemed to be a brilliant topic to explore, and permaculture in business, which is a super, I mean, it just, yeah, it's endless. The limits are endless. And perhaps we'll discuss a few in the breakout rooms. So I've got a tech support with me who's going to help me to just kick this off, because I'm terrified to touch a button that will make it all just go horribly wrong. We have done a dry run, so I think we should be good. But just let's wait and see it on the screen, and then I'll be very happy.
You'll be good, Tracey. Don't worry. It's going to work.
It will work. So can you see?
No, we can't see at the moment, unfortunately.
It's coming. And hold fire. It'll be coming shortly.
It'll be coming shortly.
Done exactly the same thing.
It's good. It's okay. It's
try again.
The tension that technology builds is always good. No, it's done the same thing again. I'm afraid it's. Oh, there we are. We're there. We're there.
Yes.
I'm happy. Can you see a light bulb with a tree, sapling, and a hand and things?
Indeed.
You can. Absolutely brilliant. Then I will begin. Okay. Thank you, Simon. I'll give you a call when I need you to help with the rest. So a joy to be here. Before we sort of sink our teeth into the discussion, I'd like just a small contemplative moment for a little bit of inner truth with my next slide, how do I get my next slide? Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going to need assistance to get to my next slide. Simon is going to have to come back into me. It's like, right, hold on. Ha!
You're there.
We're done. It's panic over. A contemplative moment, please. This is not meant as a dig, just a thought for inner thought. I feel no government, no individual, no business is taking the situation seriously enough. We are faced with some challenging things ahead, meteorological times, and we need to be doing everything we can and then a little bit more. So I'm hoping this presentation will encourage you to think about those additional things that we can all do. Here we go. I'll get the hang of the tech in a minute. We'll all be rolling. Topics I'm hoping to cover in this discussion. Who are Word Forest? What do we do? Oh, one quick thing, Water Bear. Word Forest has a documentary called #Trees Are the Key. And it was a featured video for quite some time on Water Bear. So I urge you to have a little look at it. It is a super platform, and I hope it is of interest. As Richard said, we are a small Devon-based environmental charity. We were actually born in Lyme Regis in 2017. Simon and I were sort of drawn into reforestation as philanthropists initially back in 2012. But we formalized as a charity in 2017 when we realized that this place that could grow trees 10 times faster than anywhere else on the planet was indeed a silent salvation. It was a place where we could get some action happening and start to rip down and lock in, draw down and lock in some of that CO2 that's causing us so many problems. a final little point at the end here about how permaculture is perceived. It'll be interesting to see later how many of you know permaculture and do some, perhaps practice some of the principles, but it is still widely considered to be hobbyist. We have a trustee who's a horticultural trustee at Word Forest, and he's a permaculture teacher as well. He taught at Kingston Moorwood, and he said, you know, people do it for they'll buy a course for a couple of £100 for fun. In Kenya, permaculture, which is something we've been advocating for some years, is literally a way of it's life and death. It's a way to secure food, secure water, and many other things. So it's certainly more than hobbyist. Right, the issues, which are chunky: global heating and climate change. Rising temperatures due to increased greenhouse gases emissions from human activities, of course, are leading to climate change. And this disruption results in extreme weather, sea level rise, heat waves, altered weather patterns, affecting ecosystems, human communities, and critically, wildlife. Loss of biodiversity, deforestation, habitat destruction, pollution, and climate change are all contributing to the rapid loss of biodiversity. And this loss affects ecosystem stability and reducing their resilience to environmental changes and threatening numerous species with extinction. Extreme weather events. Climate change intensifies extreme weather events such as hurricanes, droughts, floods, and wildfires. And these events lead to economic losses, displacement of communities, and food insecurity. And as we've seen recently with our own storms here, infrastructure damage. Ocean acidification and rising sea levels. Excess carbon dioxide absorbed by the world's oceans are leading to acidification. That's impacting marine ecosystems and species. Additionally, melting ice caps and glaciers continue to contribute to rising sea levels, endangering coastal communities and habitats for people and, again, wildlife. Resource depletion. Overexploitation of natural resources, including water, forests, minerals, all leads to depletion and scarcity, which affect the ecosystems and human livelihoods and businesses. Social and economic disparities. Vulnerable communities like the ones we work with all the time over in rural Kenya are basically the ones least responsible for climate change, and yet they bear the brunt of its impacts. This exacerbates existing social and economic disparities, leading to worsening health issues, food insecurity, and mass migration challenges, the likes of which we have not seen. The stuff we're seeing right now with governments complaining about a bit of transit with boats coming across the water is nothing to what we're going to see in the years ahead. I'm sorry to report. It's a fact. Energy transition challenges. Transitioning from fossil fuel to renewable energy sources is necessary to mitigate climate change. However, this transition faces obstacles such as infrastructure limitations, economic dependencies, and we're clearly experiencing those right now. I've been an EV driver for 8 years, and we're still not quite there where we need to be. And there is also still massive resistance to change from terrified industries and weak, short-sighted governments. In order to address these challenges, we require urgent and extremely well-coordinated, unified global action, innovative solutions, policy changes, and widespread adoption of sustainable practices in order to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of the situation that we find ourselves in. What is permaculture? It's basically a land management system, I like to refer to it as, that works hand in hand with Mother Nature. Permaculture was conceived and developed in the 1970s by Bill Mollinson and David Holmgren, excuse me, I'm so sorry, in Australia. Originally, the term was actually a contraction of permanent and agriculture, for that is what it was. It was the design and implementation of a permanent, sustainable agricultural system. It's also a design philosophy, if you will. And there are a set of 12 principles, excuse me, that guide the creation of sustainable and regenerative systems, drawing inspiration from nature's patterns and her processes. Permaculture emphasizes through thoughtful observation and thoughtful interaction the integration of diverse elements to to create resilient and harmonious environments. And by mimicking natural ecosystems, permaculture seeks to create systems, be they whether in agriculture or urban spaces or communities, that not only sustainably meet human needs, but also regenerate the land, enhance biodiversity, conserve resources, and foster mutually beneficial relationships between people and the environment. So does permaculture matter, I should say, and I'm going to cover that after the playing of this wonderful film, which will give my voice a break. I wanted to cover the 12 principles. You need to understand more about the 12 principles of permaculture, and it is done rather spectacularly in this little video by the Oregon State University eCampus. So I think at this stage, Richard is going to take over and play the video, and we'll speak after this.
Permaculture design principles.
We're there.
Here are my two favorite books, which are the source of the principles. Bill Mollison included a comprehensive list of principles in the Permaculture Designer's Manual. And later on, David Holmgren consolidated and repackaged the principles into 12 in his book, Permaculture Principles and Pathways Beyond Sustainability. So for simplicity's sake, I'll present to you Holmgren's 12 principles. Principle 1 is observe and interact. And this is essentially what we've been talking about for this entire course thus far. Where am I? What are the forces present on my site that I need to design for? Climate, topography, water, soils, vegetation, wildlife, wind, fire, people. These are some of the elements that are part of our observations. Principle 2 is catch and store energy. Energy is not just electricity, but stored water represents potential energy in the form of irrigation water for future crops. The biomass of a forest represents a living storage of building materials, fuel, nutrients, and water. Alternative energy systems can turn wind, sun, and flowing water into electrical energy. So this principle gives us the directive to capture and grow surpluses in our system. Principle 3 is obtain a yield. This principle promotes self-reliance and gives us the directive to reap a harvest from our permaculture system, because you can't work on an empty stomach. This principle is relevant when making a choice about which tree to plant in a location. Always choose the one with greater and more diverse yields over an ornamental plant. Yields are not just food. Yields can be building materials, fuel wood, nectar for honey, but plenty of food growing all around you is true security. Principle 4 is apply self-regulation and accept feedback. This principle directs us to live simply and consciously, limit our own consumption, because no one else is going to do that for us. We need to keep our own consumption and emissions in check, because that is our responsibility when we care for Earth and care for people. Accepting feedback means that learning from our successes and mistakes is an imperative and should lead to better choices as we learn what works and what doesn't. Principle 5 is use and value renewable resources. Renewable resources are those which replenish with modest use. This could be sustainable forestry or fishing practices. This could mean planting an orchard downslope from a forest to take advantage of the nutrient and water drift that continually moves down the hill. This is the wind. This is the fact that plants and animals breed, and if we're responsible and careful, many of these resources can provide in perpetuity. The next principle, number 6, is produce no waste. This is where we make the waste of one part of our system the food for another. This means we compost, clean and recycle gray water, repair and repurpose broken tools and equipment, reduce, reuse, repair, recycle. This also means we don't waste people by having them do hazardous and meaningless work. Principle 7 is design from patterns to details. This is one of my personal favorites. It means that first we study the climate, topography, watershed, ecology, and we get a big picture vision of how we can interact with the land and community in a regenerative way. And then our design decisions are based on that. So this road I just drew in is placed in a way where it harvests the water for this pond. The detail of road placement was based on the overall pattern of water flow in the landscape. Principle 8 is integrate rather than segregate. This principle says that the more relationships between parts of your systems, the stronger, more productive, and more resilient your system becomes. This has to do with community as well. I drew a cluster of dwellings where a cooperative community can get much more done than an individual. Many hands make light work. Principle 9 is use small and slow solutions. I've gone ahead and harvested some of the trees on the forest edge to use for fence posts and replace them with nut trees that will start bearing in about 10 to 12 years. And will then live for hundreds of years. I've planted new trees over here, which will be new fence posts when these ones rot. I've also inoculated edible mushrooms into the stumps of the trees I cut, which will produce for years and then spread to others with the fallen wood. These are all examples of playing the long game using the small and slow design principle. Principle 10 is use and value diversity. You can see we've got housing, gardens, wind power, water storage, composting, gray water, forestry, orchards, and now I've added in rotational grazing of animals. Both here and in the orchard. I've also added more trees and gardens around the homestead and fish to the pond. Diversity is one of the key aspects of permaculture. We want to conserve diverse native habitats and make our human habitats rich with an abundance of many productive elements. Diversity is also resilience. If one part of our system fails, there are others that will thrive. Principle 11 is use edges and value the marginal. I've added edible hedgerows around the animal paddocks and along the road. I've also added bamboo down below the pond, which will be sub-irrigated by water that seeps down. The edges and margins are great locations to add more productive species or habitat zones, and I can use them to create further layers of productivity. Principle 12 is creatively use and respond to change. I noticed that with the orchards and hedgerows growing in, the forest soils growing spongier from the mushroom inoculation, and the soils building from the animal rotation, water has begun to move much more slowly down the hillside. So much so that this area at the bottom of the hill is becoming somewhat of a marsh. Well, that wasn't what I planned, but I'm going to creatively use that change, and I'm going to carve out some low areas that'll stay really wet, which I can use to grow edible wetland plants, and then simultaneously build up these peninsulas full of edge to grow productive trees, which will get their roots down in this water table. Wow, I didn't even see that yield coming, but there you have it, the permaculture principles in action.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, Richard, for putting that on. Simon is just back with me to help me to get the presentation back on track. I'll just make sure that that's all good. And while he's doing that, I'll say you can see permaculture as a holistic solution to so many things, in small gardens through to massive farms, through to small rural places out in Kenya that are perhaps growing a few. Now my one's playing, so we're just hang on a second to get to the next slide. Take it to the next slide for me, please. That would be great.
I'm trying to.
If you just go to there, you'll get a little blue dot, and then it seems to. There you go.
Don't worry, you're getting there. I think go again.
Yeah, we're getting there. Hold on 1 second. I'll take it to the end maybe, and then it'll bring up the next. I love tech. I love it when it works.
It's all good.
Blue dot. Blue dot. Grab that blue dot.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Marvelous. Found another thing.
Well done, Simon.
Numbers in bottom corner. Thank you very much, Simon. Talking about Kenya. So we're places where people were traditionally growing maybe 1 or 2 crops. You know, maize is like the staple crop over there. And permaculture, and maize being, typically thwarted by climate chaos, has been year on year worse and worse, depleting in its yield, depleting the soil as well of the nutrients that it needs in order to produce the food. And the only way you can really improve everything is by growing more, growing diverse selections of fruits and vegetables, and replenishing the soil, giving the soil back the stuff that it needs, being kind to it. Does permaculture really matter? It's an interesting one, because with so few farmers in this country following these guidelines, these sort of joined up guidelines, it does make you wonder. It can be done on scale. It can be done on huge scale. And as the words say on there, it gives you a nice holistic approach to living. I'm certainly not going to do death by PowerPoint and read all the words for you, because the lines that, the stuff is there. It's there to see for yourself. And I'm hoping by now it's starting to sort of take some shape. The different issues that sort of surround permaculture and the reasons why it's so immensely important are tenfold, and I'll take you through each of them very briefly. Sustainability offers a sustainable solution for living and designing systems that work in harmony with nature. By mimicking natural ecosystems, permaculture provides practices that regenerate the environment rather than depleting it. And also, while I'm saying these, think about them in respect of business. You can find those correlations even at this early stage. Resilience. Permaculture systems are inherently resilient. Their diversity, integration, self-regulation allow them to adapt to changing conditions, making them even more robust against environmental challenges like climate change or extreme weather events. Resource efficiency. Permaculture maximizes resource efficiency by utilizing renewable resources, minimizing waste, and creating closed-loop systems where outputs become inputs elsewhere. This efficiency is crucial in a world with finite resources. Food security obviously enhances food sovereignty by emphasizing diverse and sustainable agriculture. Permaculture gardens and farms produce a variety of foods while managing soil fertility. As I just mentioned, it's critical, reducing dependency on unsustainable agricultural practices and obviously moving away from chemical intervention. Community building. Permaculture fosters community engagement and cooperation. It often involves shared resources, knowledge exchange, and collaborative efforts towards creating sustainable living spaces, which is strengthened in community bonds. Environmental regeneration. Excuse me. Permaculture helps to restore degraded lands and ecosystems, and techniques like regenerative agriculture, water harvesting, and reforestation obviously contribute to that soil restoration. It's vital. It's a vital part. Excuse me, biodiversity conservation as well, and improved water cycles. Climate mitigation. Its focus on carbon sequestering practices like agroforestry and soil building helps mitigate climate change by capturing and storing carbon in vegetation and the soil. Education and empowerment. Permaculture empowers individuals and communities to take control of their lives and the environments that they're in. Its principles encourage lifelong learning, self-sufficiency, and a deeper understanding of ecological systems. Nearly there, economic viability. Permaculture can offer economically viable models through sustainable practices, and it reduces input costs over time. It gets better as it goes on, creating economically feasible alternatives to conventional systems. And finally, long-term vision. You'll go back to that video and you'll remember that didn't all happen in 5 minutes. You need to have a long-term vision. Permaculture advocates for designing for the long term. Its principles aim for systems that sustain themselves and future generations, making it a crucial approach excuse me, in addressing long-term environmental challenges. And the whole purpose of this discussion really is to focus on permaculture and sustainability in business and showing how they're interconnected. But I felt we needed to cover step 1 and step 2 before we could get to this point. But I'm hoping it will now make a little bit more sense as we apply these thoughts and these ideas to our businesses. So there are lots of nice bits of interconnectivity, and we're going to walk you through 8 of the points really. Ethical framework. Permaculture and sustainable business share ethical foundations, obviously. Permaculture principles focused on caring for the earth, caring for people, fair share. They align with triple bottom line concept in sustainable business, which emphasizes people, planet, and profit. Resource efficiency. Both approaches prioritize resource efficiency. Permaculture's closed loop systems and sustainable business practices seek to reduce waste, to optimize resource use, and to minimize environmental impact. Long-term vision. As we've mentioned earlier, but both permaculture and sustainable business have a long-term vision, and they should continue to do so. Permaculture designs systems for resilience and sustainability over time, while sustainable business considers the long-term impacts of their decisions on the environment and society, and of course, their bottom line. Community and stakeholder engagement. Both emphasize community and stakeholder engagement. Permaculture often involves community participation and knowledge sharing, while sustainable business focuses on engaging stakeholders, fostering relationships, and addressing those social concerns. Moving on to the final 4. Innovation and adaptability. I'll put those teeth in. Adaptability. Use someone else's instead. Both are encouraging innovation and adaptability. Permaculture's creative responses to environmental challenges resonates with the need for innovation in sustainable business practices to adapt to changing market conditions and environmental issues. Look at the vegan market right now. Look at plant-based food, where that's going now. There's a huge need for that to be shifting and adapting to what the markets are calling for. Economic viability. Both aim for economic viability. Permaculture principles advocate for fair share and sustainable livelihoods, aligning with sustainable business models that seek the profitability whilst considering social and environmental impacts. Environmental stewardship. Both promote environmental stewardship. They do, absolutely. Permaculture actively restores and regenerates ecosystems, while sustainable businesses integrate environmental considerations into their operations to minimize negative impacts. And finally, systems thinking. Both adopt a systems thinking approach. Permaculture views landscapes and systems holistically, as we said at the beginning, recognizing the interconnectedness of all of these elements. And similarly, sustainable business, any business, sustainable business, will analyze their operation as part of a larger economic, social, and environmental system. I hope that that's kind of given a nice overview of what permaculture is. It's a big, complex beast. I was very glad for that video in the middle, because I think the way he drew that joined up piece of thinking of creation of soil health and soil care, which is so frequently forgotten by businesses. The stuff that's still going on in the Amazon, taking down all the trees, there's no thought there for the longer term, and there just needs to be. No one's intervening to stop these things. I think when I break it down into tinier parts, I feel, can I be an intervener in these big business decisions that are out of my control? Damn right I can. By being a conscious consumer, by being a plant eater. So 8 years ago, I watched Cowspiracy. It was one of many environmental documentaries I'd seen at the time, looking at how animal agriculture particularly was depleting the planet of the things that it needs in order to work well. And Simon and I went plant-based. We literally went plant-based overnight. I'm 8 years into plant-based, and I love my food. I have no regrets. And my only regret actually is that I wish I'd done it earlier. And I think that comes with time and consciousness. And as the veil lifts and you realize the damage that is being done by the standard agricultural practices, permaculture is a solution. If that were done en masse, oh, what a day that would be. It can be done en masse. We are doing it in Kenya, in small groups, in small communities. And I can tell you, I said at the beginning, it's a matter of life and death. Permaculture is changing lives, not just bringing food security, not just bringing water security, the obvious things. It's reducing domestic violence occurrences. It's stopping childhood pregnancies. How are these things connected? It's all about the sustainability of the soul, of the person, the human needs, our requirements, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, air, food. Food, you've got to have food in your tummy. If you're having an abundance of food that you might enjoy, then you're releasing some of the pressure. You're stopping some of those trigger points for causing catastrophe within a community and behind closed doors. And you can do so many good things in your own environment, in your own garden, and by supporting Word Forest and and also other permaculture organizations and growing organizations. You can change the world quite literally. It sounds very grandiose, but it's a fact. I'm at the point where I say fancy a takeaway. So fancy a takeaway. I wanted to bring permaculture to a point where you could put a little bit of it in your own life, in your own garden, or someone else's garden if you haven't got a garden, or in your community garden or an allotment. So there are many elements to permaculture. All those lovely principles are great, but how do they break down into nice simple chunks? I'm going to give you a couple of simple examples. If you have a compost bin in your garden, if it's very close to the back of your house or your back door or your kitchen door or wherever, you are far more likely to use it. You're far more likely to chuck all your compost in it. If it's way down the bottom of the garden where you can't see it and it's tiny because it's a bit of an eyesore, you're less likely to use it. So the things that you need to attend to frequently, have close to you, have close to your home, your source. Change the way that you're thinking about the things that you're doing. A kitchen garden, your herb gardens should be just outside your kitchen if you can do that, or on your windowsill, so that you're likely to use them. Shorten the time that you're not trotting off down the garden to get this, that, and the other. Makes a lot of sense. Simple. Recite your compost bins, perhaps. But here's another one. Companion planting. Companion planting is a wonderful thing. And I must tell you about this super one called the Three Sisters. And I'm hopeful that perhaps maybe one or two of you might know the Three Sisters. It's it's a Native American Indian design. Simon calls it first person, too many drugs, not enough water. Hang on a minute. It's American Indian. It's First Nation. That's the words I was looking for. I knew it would come to me with the water. First Nation. Okay, so what they did was they grew corn. Corn grows brilliantly, really nice, tall and straight. And if I could turn the camera around, I'd show you our corn in the garden. Did it for the first. I've been talking about Three Sisters for years. Last year, this year, we did it. And oh my God, did it work. But they're looking a bit knackered now. But I'll tell you about that in a minute and tell you why. Corn. Up corn, grow beans. Grow beans. Any beans you like. Runner beans, green beans, purple beans, yellow beans. We had them all growing up, those, let me tell you. Let me growing up the corn. Why? It's companion planting and it's brilliant. The beans lock nitrogen into the soil. The corn is super happy about that. You don't need to stick a stake in the ground to grow your beans because they're growing up this beautiful, thick, solid piece of corn. It's absolutely terrific. That is companion planting just on the go. The final bit that makes it super brilliant, particularly in Australia, where, well, Bill Mollinson, the founding father of permaculture, I'm sure it's certainly used over there, but most definitely in Kenya, a squash, any squash you like. Butternut squash on there looking quite delicious. We've got butternut squash soup for lunch today, which is great. Butternut squash grown at the bottom of the corn and the beans. Why? Because it has these massive big leaves, huge big leaves that are normally at least a foot or so above the ground. What happens there is you water the ground. Think about, let's be in Kenya now, where water is a bit of a precious resource. We're watering the ground. We've got a nice mulch on the ground. We've got this beautiful big leaves that's protecting the water in that area and keeping the moisture in, instead of just having exposed ground where it's just going to go up to the atmosphere far quicker. Those three things in combination are just a dream come true. And I can tell you, our sweet corn this year was the best we've ever had. It was awesome. Now, if you haven't got a garden and can't grow that, you don't need a garden. You can grow it in a pot. We grew it in a pot as well. I grew it in a pot as an experiment, and it grew well. It was a bit of a struggle with the squash. So, but you can go for something like a courgette, that would work, and not be too sort of lollopy or lollop out the edge of your pot, but it will still work. That is a piece of permaculture in action that you can do, or you can encourage others to do. There are so many.
Fantastic, Tracey. I think we're going to have to come to a pause at some point because we're getting a little bit far on time. So
I'm good. One final last piece is, don't forget the elephant in the room. You've got to keep looking at how you can be better at doing what you're doing, and planting trees in the tropics, where they grow 10 times faster than anywhere else on the planet, is a thing perhaps for you to consider. Maybe consider making Word Forest your charity of the year, or holding a small fundraiser, or joining us as a corporate partner. There are lots of ways we can make you an eco-hero. This is what we're doing. So we're teaching permaculture over there. You can be that person responsible for serious change in the world, social, economic, and physical here in our own homestead. All of these things can be done if we just keep doing what we're doing over there. And on that note, I will say asante sana, which is Kiswahili for thank you.